Hello and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be different than our typical vlog. In my last video I mentioned that I wanted to start experimenting with the discussion of topics that I learned throughout my education, and today is going to be the first episode of that. I believe that I'm going to title this series Legally Unqualified because in a court of law I am nowhere near qualified to be an expert, and I hope to be one day. However, for now, legally unqualified to make any statements that should be completely taken as fact. Everything I say is going to be what I've learned in my education, and if I make any mistakes, please let me know, or I will personally correct them in future videos if I come across any misinformation that I spread, because that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is educate others about the field of forensic psychology to help them better understand certain topics that may come up in the news, or anything that you might have formed opinions on that you might change once you learn the reasoning behind why those decisions or rulings or anything was pretty much made. Because as the world of true crime becomes more popular in the media, a lot of feelings begin to turn up and people feel very strongly, but I believe that some of those feelings can be misplaced if you don't know why the decisions that were made in that way. So today's topic we're going to discuss is automatism. Now, automatism can mean different things depending on the field that is discussing it. In medicine, it's often referred to as any behavior that is not under conscious control. So that can range from anything as to the movements that occur during a seizure, the tics that occur during Tourette's, and other things of that nature. And in forensic psychology, as it is somewhat linked to medicine, thinks of those in the same way. However, automatism in a psycho-legal perspective is slightly different. Automatism is used as an excuse defense. Now, what does that mean exactly? Excuse defenses are any defenses that attempt to remove legal responsibility from the perpetrator. And this is done so by attempting to attack one of two things in terms of legal responsibility. And they are two Latin phrases known as mens rea and actus reus. So mens rea and actus reus are two terms used in both forensic psychology and in legal studies. And they refer to the guilty mind and the guilty action. Mens rea, or the guilty mind, is what we often think of in terms of the classic insanity defense. The person was too deranged or mentally ill to understand the criminality of their actions or to prevent themselves from acting in that way. Actus reus, or the guilty act, is a little bit harder for people to conceptualize. I mean, we can all agree that there are certain actions that are inherently bad, or at least we are able to appreciate in the sense of just grasping the conceptual fact that something is illegal, such as theft or battery. However, there are some odd gray areas in the legal system, such as if you end up breaking someone's rib while you are attempting CPR, you aren't going to be arrested for assault because the act you were doing, performing CPR, is not criminal. It may have resulted in someone getting hurt, but that's not the same as getting into a fight with someone and breaking their rib. Although fights can be debatable depending on whether there are grounds for self-defense. But that's not really what this is about. As I mentioned, mens rea is often cited in insanity defenses, although this is not the case for automatism defenses. Automatism defenses, as an excuse defense, attempt to focus on the actus reus because they're trying to argue that due to the unconscious nature of the act, that they can't be found criminally responsible. Now, this does sound a bit cinematic. I mean, the most publicized cases of automatism defenses are often the ones that have crazy headlines like man strangles wife while sleepwalking and such. And yeah, they are kind of crazy. However, from a legal perspective and a medico-legal perspective, that's just kind of how it is. I have to give a disclaimer that automatism defenses are not easy to prove. You can't go into a court of law and just say, oh, I almost started going into that scene from The Room. I did not hit her.
Oh, hi, Mark.
But you cannot go into a court of law and say that the assault charges you're being charged with were not under your control, that you were sleepwalking when it happened. These defenses are extremely hard to prove, and it takes a lot of testing and a lot of evidence. Now, let's go into some disorders and diseases that might be grounds for an automatism defense. These can include epilepsy, sleepwalking, also known as somnambulism, certain diseases such as Parkinson's disease, and in some cases, even schizophrenia. However, those are widely debated upon, and again, these things are not easy to prove. It's also important to note that automatism defenses are total defenses. Now, this means that if you are found not criminally responsible due to an instance of automatism, that you'll be acquitted and you will serve no time, you will not be sent to an institution. And that's why defenses such as intoxication do not work as automatism defenses. This is often because you are typically aware of the potential side effects of taking drugs, whether recreational or prescription, such as the risk of getting into a car accident while driving drunk. I would say almost all of us understand that if you make the choice, whether fully, partially, or maybe if you're so blackout drunk that you don't even remember it, make the choice to drive while intoxicated, that you can potentially harm someone. And that knowledge comes before even making the choice to drink. And that's why defenses such as intoxication don't work as an automatism defense, because there's a reasonable expectation that you knew prior to ingesting that substance that you could put others in harm's way. And that also applies to certain automatism defenses. For example, if you are aware of your seizure disorder and you are aware of things that can exacerbate it, or if you're not taking your medication, and you end up getting behind the wheel and you have a seizure and you end up getting into an accident, you can be found criminally negligent due to the fact that you knowingly did something that could put others in harm's way, such as not taking your medication, subjecting yourself to the potential of having a seizure, and then getting behind the wheel where you could knowingly have a seizure while driving. The same goes with cases of somnambulism. If you know of certain factors, such as drinking, that can make the chances of having a sleepwalking event occur, and then you end up going out drinking with your friends and come home, go to bed, and you have an episode of sleepwalking, and in that you strangle your partner, you can still be found negligent. And that's confusing to a lot of people. I mean, yes, you are still unconscious while these things occur, so you might not feel as though you're responsible for it, but in the court of law, you are, because you could have not put yourself in a situation that makes it more likely for that event to occur. And the downside of this is, with things like sleepwalking, there really isn't a treatment. So am I going to stop doing things that I enjoy to reduce the chances of me having an episode, knowing that I could do something dangerous? Or am I going to take these chances? And that's a hard decision to make, especially considering that not every episode could lead to a violent action. And a vast majority of people who have a seizure disorder or who sleepwalk or who have any of the other disorders and diseases that I mentioned, a vast majority of them do not have violent outbursts. This specifically is referring to those who have a history of violent behavior during any of these episodes. So given this, let's have a little thought experiment. What if we have a case of an individual who was standing near the edge of, let's say, the Grand Canyon, and they had a seizure which caused them to flail their arms, and they end up knocking the person next to them over the edge of the canyon, and unfortunately that person ends up perishing. How do we approach this case, and is this person criminally responsible? From the outset, there are a lot of questions that we want to ask. Was that individual on medication at the time? Was there a history of a seizure disorder, or is this the first time that it's occurred? Because not all seizure disorders are known from birth. Some can onset due to things such as drug use or alcohol consumption. Well, typically excessive alcohol consumption, but I digress. Or just a vast majority of other things. So is there a history? Is there a family history of it? And maybe it was late onset for them. Who was the victim? Is this person known to the perpetrator? Because that may be grounds for motive. Even if someone has a seizure disorder, that doesn't mean that they also aren't capable of using that as a sort of front for malicious behavior. You could be known to have a seizure disorder and pretend to have a seizure and, I don't know, whack your wife over the edge of the cliff and blame it on a seizure. And to some people that might make sense. Oh, well, they're known to have a seizure disorder and they clearly had a seizure, and it's just an unfortunate accident. So we have to look at who the victim was. And then we have to get a lot of testing done. We need to see a neurologist, specifically someone who ideally specializes in seizure disorders, to assess whether the symptoms presented during that individual's seizures align with such an action happening. Because not all seizures look the same. Some people do flail. Some are more rigid. It depends on the type of disorder, on the individual, and in some cases the flailing might not even be enough to knock someone off the edge of a cliff. So you have to look at all of those things. You have to, again, look at whether they were taking medication and whether they had stopped, or if they had been engaging in activities that make a seizure more likely, such as drug and alcohol use, or in some cases, flashing lights. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen warnings on certain videos or for certain events that say if you have epilepsy, this may trigger a seizure. And so we have to look at circumstances such as that. Were there any exacerbating factors that could have brought on the seizure? So just from the little synopsis of what was presented, although it may seem like a case of automatism, there's a lot of work that has to be done to determine whether or not it actually was. So if you have any questions or more things that I could have gone into detail about, I know this was a very brief synopsis of what automatism is and means in a psycholegal perspective, but this is just testing the waters of how I want to see this series go. If there is a topic that you would like me to talk about in a future video related to forensic psychology, whether that be going into more detail about the insanity defense or other things of that nature. I was going to say specific cases, but again, I'm legally unqualified, so I can't give much insight into specific cases and why I think they occurred. I mean, the thing we learn from day one studying forensic psychology is that you cannot make judgments if you did not assess the person yourself directly. So I cannot make qualified assessments of what occurred in a case. I can give my best judgment as a layperson with some education on the topic, but I cannot crack cases for you. I cannot tell you exactly why people did certain things. I can't diagnose people for you or tell you whether I truly believe that they were or weren't insane, or whether I believe their defense was credible. But I can explain what some of those defenses mean and maybe help you understand why the case went in that direction, and go over the various pieces of evidence used and explain, hey, this is why that worked or may have worked in this case, and this is what they would have looked at from a psycholegal perspective. So if there are any topics you'd like me to discuss in a future video, please let me know in the comments below. If I made any mistakes, also, please let me know, or if you would like any clarification, I am absolutely happy to do so. And thank you for coming on this new beginning with me. It was something that I wanted to do even from the outset of starting this channel. I wanted to discuss some of the things that interest me in my education. And until next time, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I may have another vlog coming later in the week or this weekend. Depends on filming schedule and editing schedule. But yeah, thank you so much, and I will see you guys next time for another new beginning. Bye!